I'm going to have a stab at what I think the watch industry will look like post-COVID. Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville. Some of you have commented my channel has become a bit more introspective of late. That hasn't been entirely deliberate. Part of it is, but a lot of it is simply that there hasn't been a lot going on in COVID. There has been some releases. I've done some of that industry stuff, but a lot of it has been fairly half-hearted from the brands, and so it's been kind of half-hearted analysis from me. The other thing is at the global level, at the really big industry stuff, I haven't felt confident that I've known how COVID is going to play out. Now, I might still not know, but I'm confident I've got some idea. History will show one day or another how right or wrong I was. But anyway, here's a couple of things which I think we can note going forward. The first is I don't think there's going to be a crash in prices. There might be some stagnation, there might be a slight fall off, but I can't see a crash coming. And that's for two reasons. One, I don't think companies are getting some level of government support, and at the same time they're shrinking their distribution, they're shrinking their overheads, so that whilst they're burning through some cash, I don't think they're at a point where they feel like they have to massively overproduce and pump product in to get cash coming in fast. I think most companies are kind of holding on and looking at an overhead reduction rather than a cash increase model here. I think the other thing that you're seeing is that individuals aren't feeling the need to panic sell. Unlike previous shocks, government and banks and other institutions have kind of come to the party and are working really hard to stabilize the economy. So those people that have taken a bit of a hit from the pandemic, unlike previous times, have actually got a bit of a cushion this time, in most countries anyway. I think the other thing that you're seeing is that amongst the community, the buyer, the potential private seller, the impact of the pandemic is very, very lumpy. Yes, there have been some people that have really taken a hit, but then there's a lot of other people who are doing okay. That, whilst they might have taken some sort of a hit, it's not very big, and in some cases they're actually doing quite well out of this. Those people are also finding, whether you're doing well out of the pandemic or whether you're not, I think most people are also finding their lifestyle choices are being a bit restricted. So even if your discretionary income has taken a bit of a hit from the pandemic, your options for spending that discretionary income have been halved. You can't travel. There's a lot of services you can't get. You can't go out and eat anymore, at least in a lot of countries. And so watches, whilst they are part of your discretionary income, and whilst your discretionary income is shrinking, at least you can spend money there. So with all of that stuff going on, and you can save money there as well. So with all that going on, I don't think we're going to see a crash in prices. What happens with overall sales volumes, particularly on the secondary market, will be interesting, because whilst the need to panic sell may have been dialed back a fair bit, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a corresponding continuation of the desire to buy. So that's where I'm thinking what we're going to see is a kind of stabilization of prices, as people that are selling don't want to take a hit, a financial bath selling stuff, but the people that are buying aren't as comfortable necessarily spending new money on watches. So you're probably going to see prices stay stable and people holding off and waiting for something to happen on the buy side. Okay, so what else do I think? I think we're going to see a surprising number of brands get through this perfectly fine. I don't think we're going to see the wholesale devastation of the brand community that was forecast early. I think part of that, and I'll start at the bottom and end of the market and work our way up. Micro brands generally don't have a lot of overhead. They live off the smell of an oily rag. So they haven't bought machines that they can't sell. They haven't bought warehouses that they can't sell. Where they've invested money, it's normally been in R&D or development of a design, which then resulted in the production of watches, which they can recoup by selling those watches. And the market indications are that people are still buying, particularly micro brand level watches. Those guys, still good brands, still sell well. Bad brands that weren't selling well previously aren't selling well now. It's not COVID that's killing a lot of the bad micro brands, it's that they were going to die anyway. So a lot of those guys seem to be doing pretty well. You know, they've had to be careful. I'm not saying they're making money, they're making out like bandits, but they're doing okay. At the next level down, I think we're actually seeing the upside of what many people had thought of the darks at the next level up. I think what we're seeing is the upside of what a lot of people thought was the dark side of small to medium manufacturers, and that is the benefits of outsourcing. Just as the micro brands don't have a lot of big overheads, I think we're seeing that a lot of these smaller brands that we all thought were going to die are actually going to make it through because they had outsourced a lot of their costs, because they had not been investing in new machinery and new inventory and new parts suppliers and new manufacturing facilities. Because they hadn't been doing that, because they'd been shuffling a lot of it off to China, they're able to weather this storm. And because the guys in China have got a lot of support from government, because they're huge, in many cases it's a very small number of very large factories that have got a fair bit of ability to move supply and demand around. They're doing okay over in China, and as a result, the smaller companies that had outsourced to those guys are actually doing okay as well. They're not, again, like the micro brands, not making out like bandits. No one's buying new chalets on the back of this, but they're not collapsing. I think you're also seeing the benefits. They're also being supported a little bit by governments through either, employee pay bonuses and employee pay padding and stuff like that. So I think at the lowest end of the Swiss German market, that outsourcing that we were all a bit uncomfortable about previously is actually going to save most of those brands. As you move up into, if you like, the brands within groups, so bigger brands, not necessarily themselves made of money, but they are part of groups like LVMH, Richemont, Swatch, they're going to be fine. In most cases, the watch parts of those big groups are relatively small. And those big groups have got big buckets of money that they're willing, that so far what we've seen is they are willing to use, they're willing to burn through to support their brands. And I think also, if you do look at the numbers, very few of these brands seem to be posting losses. We're seeing massive reductions in income, but we're seeing massive reductions in profit. But I don't recall seeing too many of the LVMHs or Richemonts posting losses. And I think, go back to my previous point, what you're seeing is a huge reduction in inventory, you're seeing a huge reduction in supply, and they're really hacking at their cost base here, which is again why you're not going to see massive price falls, and also why I think a lot of those brands within the big groups will get by okay. And above that, you've got the super high-end guys who are just rolling in cash and couldn't care less. Rolex, Patek, Audemars Piguet, etc. Rolex, for example, is the biggest landholder in Switzerland, it is rumoured. So, they've got money to burn. They don't care. ADs, on the other hand, a lot of them are going to be feeling the pressure. I think a lot of them have already closed, and I think a lot of them will close even in the future. That's a lot of people had spoken about that was always going to happen. So maybe what all COVID's done is turn the heat right up, but I think you're going to see a lot of ADs go away. If the ADs go away, what you are going to need is new distribution channels. If you're a Swiss or German manufacturer, the idea of having a retail chain you dealt with doesn't work anymore if that retail chain doesn't exist. A lot of your watches have recently been sold online. The obvious example is to move to an online selling environment. However, you've probably burnt through a fair bit of cash and it's not something you know. So if you're a brand like that, you want to get online, a lot of your traditional distribution channels are gone, but you want to get back out into the market. How do you do it? I think the easiest way is get in bed with existing online sellers. And I think that is what we are going to see moving forward. The role of the big retail chains that were previously the ADs for a lot of these watch brands is going to be replaced by online retailers. I think we're going to see what were previously pariahs in the secondary market, places like Chronext and Jomashop, are going to become a regular part of the primary market. They are going to become ADs for the brand. Does this mean your discounts are going to go away? Absolutely not. Because you were never really getting a discount in the first place. Discounts are entirely illusory. And that's because MSRPs are entirely illusory. An MSRP is an arbitrary number promoted by a company to give retailers and the customers some concept of where a price would be. But it's not enforceable on the seller. It's not the price the seller paid. And there's only a loose relationship between the price that the retailer paid and that MSRP we saw anyway. So there is zero reason why, if Jomashop is currently advertising a 25% discount on a watch, there is absolutely no reason why tomorrow, if they were the AD for that watch, they wouldn't be selling at exactly the same price. And I suspect we won't see that change much. So as Jomashop and as Chronext and those guys start moving in to be ADs for major brands, I don't think it's going to really impact price, up or down. You might ask, why would those secondary sellers who have been doing quite well want to play that game? I think it's primarily because, remember, go back to what I said earlier, a lot of the distribution, a lot of the overproduction that these guys used to live and breathe on, that's drying up. If they don't find new sources of supply, those brands like Jomashop are going to die of thirst, in that they just don't have enough stuff coming in to process. And if you look at their inventories right now, you can see that. You can see that a lot of the inventories in Jomashop and Chronext and those places are kind of old. In ye olde days, I used to be able to go to a place like Jomashop and see effectively the full range of a lot of the brands I liked. The full current range of most of the brands I liked were replicated on the secondary market. That is simply not true anymore. If I pick a brand that I do follow, like Breitling, then probably maybe 15% of the current watch inventory, or the current catalogue, is available on a place like Jomashop. I would say that 95% of the stuff that Jomashop is selling for a brand like Breitling is actually no longer in catalogue. It's old stuff that was dumped and has probably been in their inventory for a year or more. So if those places like Jomashop can't find new sources of stock, as I said, they'll simply die. They'll run out of fuel. It's not that we don't want them to go anywhere. It's just that they'll have nothing to sell us. And so that's why I think post-COVID, those guys are going to shift in their relationship, and they're going to stop being secondary market and they're going to start being primary market. I think we're also going to go back to now the watch sellers, the watchmakers, we're going to see a backing off of investment. Whilst I think a lot of them are going to survive this period, they have been burning cash. They've been underpinned by some government support, some institutional support. They've been cutting costs, but they've at the same time they have been burning through cash. They've been burning through the cash that they would have used to buy new machines, to buy new facilities, to build a new factory. They also, most of them are probably feeling a little bit gun shy about taking remaining cash and investing it in a new CNC machine, in a new factory. And so I think you're going to see a lot of companies winding back on that kind of investment. And I think you are going to see, as a result, something like a lot of the talk about everything coming in-house and in-house being the thing, you're going to notice that kind of gets wound back. Even the big players that do have in-house facilities, I think are going to wind back on their talk about everything being in-house for one very important reason. The vast bulk of in-house movements and cases and everything are often made by companies or divisions kind of separate to the watchmaking part of a company, but that the watchmaking company has a level of interest in. A classic would be here, Kanisi and Tudor. So for a long time, Tudor was very clear. Tudor movements were Tudor movements. They were only Tudor movements, and it was all in-house, and no one got to touch them. And then there was a bit of a relationship with Breitling, but they're kind of peers in the market, so that doesn't disturb anything. And the word Kanisi didn't appear anywhere. No one bought a Kanisi movement, even though that was the name of the company and the factory where these Tudor movements all come from. Suddenly what we're seeing is Norcane, I think, is that the name of the brand? Norcane having access to Kanisi movements. Fortis advertising that they're moving to Kanisi movements. Not Tudor movements, Kanisi movements. And I think even the bigger companies, the companies that could have afforded to make these sort of white label manufacturers from whom they scooped up their product and then relabeled it as Tudor, I think they're going to dial back on that because they need to make third-party sales. And they don't necessarily want their name associated with other brands. And so these little white label, proprietary, in-house, but separate groups are going to, I think some of them are going to start stepping out of the shadows because their parent companies need them to be selling to third parties now, and they don't necessarily want, whereas Tudor might be perfectly happy for Breitling to be running around saying that they've got a Tudor movement, they're probably less comfortable with new brands like Norcane or smaller entry-level brands like Fortis doing the same thing. And finally, what we're going to see is a massive consolidation of Swiss exports of watches to China going directly to China. It's long been known that a very large percentage of watches that go to certain markets, particularly the US and the UK, are actually on-sold to Chinese tourists. In a world where tourism has shrunk anyway, where tourism out of China has shrunk even more, clearly those people are still going to want to buy watches. And if you can't bring them to watches in America and in the UK, then really if you're a Swiss watch company, you have no choice but to send the watches directly to them while they're still in China. And I think we're going to see a lot of that. The figures so far that we're seeing out of FH are indicating that the Chinese sales, exports of watches to China are exploding. I think that is going to continue. I think a huge chunk of what we're seeing there is actually a consolidation of stuff that was always being sold to Chinese citizens now simply happening in their home of origin, in their country of origin. One thing that could be really interesting out of that is as this dies down in a year or two, we might begin to get a sense of actually how important various markets truly are. So if a country like the US at the moment constitutes, memory, 15 to 20% of the Swiss watch industry, watch exports, we might find that if over the next few years a percentage, a large portion of that which was being on-sold to Chinese tourists is now picked up and moved over to China, it's possible we could see that actual internal sales to Americans within America may constitute as little as 10% of Swiss watch exports. That could be really interesting. And when that starts becoming obvious to people, that may start to affect the way the market works. Anyway, that's it. Fairly long and rambling. It's mostly me trying to analyze what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling going on. As I said, I might be entirely wrong, but I don't think I am. If I did think I was, I wouldn't have put the video out. What do you think? Do you think I'm wildly off the mark? Do you think I'm pretty close? Do you think that there's more or less that's going to happen? Let me know in the comments. I've been Pete McConville, Not So Obvious Watches, and I'll see you later. Bye.